This is Ines de Castro of Portugal, but really of a region of Europe that they used to call Castile, which is Spain. Ines de Castro, and she is the subject of one of the biggest mix-ups ever, right? And still to this day, well known in Portugal because she is known as the queen who was physically crowned queen after her death. And the mix-up that led to that is one hell of a precke, and I'm here to share that with you today, all right? So let's get into it. In 14th century Portugal, 13 so on, so on, so on, the Portuguese prince fell in love with his wife's lady-in-waiting, his wife's maid. Had 4 children with her and watched his father order her assassination, took up arms against his own father, became king, then hunted down the killers of the mother of his children, Ines de Castro, who he loved, ate dinner while he watched their hearts being torn out. The one them who killed his lover, the mother of his children, declared his murdered lover his secret queen of Portugal, and may have made every nobleman in the kingdom come up and kiss her exhumed deceased hand. 111 mix-up, let's get into it. So, in 1339, Constance Manuel, a Castilian princess, granddaughter of Sancho IV of Castile, was betrothed to Prince Pedro, who was the heir to the Portuguese throne. The marriage was political, right? Because Portugal needed an alliance with Castile against the Moors and against each other's rival claimants, right? So Castile was a part of what we now know as Spain, because when Queen Isabella of Castile married King Ferdinand of what was called Aragon, they came together, and Castile was the bigger part and dominated most of the affairs, but they were essentially ruled as one kingdom. And then later on, those two with some other kingdoms were unified, and they give it the name Spain. My apologies. But anyway, so Constanza arrives from Castile in Portugal with her household, including her maids and thing, and what they call a lady-in-waiting. And Ines de Castro was the lady-in-waiting. And Ines de Castro was a Galician noblewoman of the powerful Castro family. So, you know, Fidel Castro from Cuba. But this is where the name Castro is coming from, a powerful family from those times. And she was an illegitimate daughter of a Castilian nobleman born around 1320. Pedro and Constanza married, but Pedro's eyes was on Ines from the start, and the entire court knew that when Constanza came and married to Pedro, that's all political, it's about a marriage between kingdoms for political purposes. And they knew that there was no love there, and that who he really liked was the lady-in-waiting. In other words, his wife's maid. See the mix-up a start already. Pedro and Constanza had 3 legitimate children, one of whom became Ferdinand of Portugal. And this was from 1341 to 1344. In 1345, Constanza died in childbirth at age 25. And Pedro was 25 at that time too. So they were both pretty young. And widowed, because his wife died in childbirth. So he was widowed with a small daughter and a heir apparent. So he had a small daughter and he had a child that was going to be in line to be king after him. Pedro and Ines do. So after Constanza died, and there are 3 legitimate children, Pedro became open with Ines because that was who he loved. Ended up having 4 children with Ines who were considered illegitimate children. So he had 3 legitimate children with Constanza, his wife, who died at 25, and had 4 children with Ines after Constanza died, that those were considered illegitimate children. Okay. Pedro's father, the king, called King Afonso IV, he saw a political nightmare because with the 4 children that Ines had, that could cause a confusion right there. Ines Castro's brothers, who were from Castile, were ambitious nobles who began having all these rumors about ways to get Ines's children to be the successors to the throne of Portugal. This is all politics. It's about the money. It's about land. It's about influence. It's about control, right? So Ines's brothers, who remember now, her children are illegitimate. They're trying to figure out a way to get Ines's children to take over the lineage to the throne of Portugal. And this was it. If Pedro succeeded his father, married Ines, or claimed that he already had, and legitimized those 4 children, Portugal would have Castilian blood. They would have a Castilian-blooded royal line to the throne. To the older generation of Portuguese nobles, that looked like the slow swallowing of Portugal into Castile, a fear they had fought wars against for 2 centuries. So for more than 200 years, Portugal and Castile, they were at war to have political power, to have control of the region and so forth. And Portugal was all about protecting their sovereignty, protecting their independence, protecting the right to exist in their own space and not be swallowed up by Castile. So even before Spain went out all over the world and tried to take over the world in terms of colonialism, Europe, they were embroiled in their own problems associated with power and control and greed and wanting to take over others. This is like a cultural thing that is just endemic to them, hundreds and perhaps thousands of years, okay? So Portugal did not want to legitimize Ines's children because that will then blood up the succession line towards control of Portugal. Afonso, the king, tried at first to break up Pedro and Ines with political pressure. He banished Ines from the court, and Pedro brought her back. She wasn't supposed to be in anywhere in the royal court, and Pedro bring her back because it's Ines he loved. He sent Ines to the convent. Pedro go and look for her, and Pedro found her and brought her back. By the mid-1350s, the old king was being told by his closest advisors, and these 3 men are important, listen to them now, Pedro Coelho, Alvaro Gonzalez, and Diogo Lopez Pacheco. Those 3 men, they were always in King Afonso's ears, Pedro's father's ears, that we need to address this situation with Ines and these children. It's serious. The independence and the sovereignty of Portugal depends on this. We have to deal with it decisively. But everything they did to deal with it, Pedro reversed it because Pedro was in love. You see this thing? Love and power. All these sagas and these stories all over the world, on the African continent, on the Asian continent, and the European continent, where love and power meet, problems. Right? So we have to look on this thing. It's a love story, but it's also a constitutional crisis locked up in a love story. Right? The question wasn't whether or not Pedro loved Ines. The question was whether legitimate inheritance through a foreign-blooded mistress would dissolve the Portuguese sovereignty. Every act of cruelty in this case and every act of revenge runs through that political calculation. The personal and the political cannot be separated. That's what makes this like a proper mix-up. All right, so we're moving along. Okay, so where they live was it's called the Palace of Santa Clara in a place called Coimbra, right? Which is one of Portugal's oldest cities, right? All right. So one day King Afonso sent away Pedro to do royal business. And while Pedro was away, King Afonso turned up with 3 men. The same 3 men, Pedro Coelho, Alvaro Gonzalez, Diego Lopez Pacheco, right? And they came for Ines. They came to unalive Ines. They came to kill Ines. And when the king told them to do it, Ines started begging for her life. Right? Ines threw herself, this is documented, Ines threw herself at King Afonso's feet. She pointed to the 4 children, his grandchildren, and begged for her life. Right? It looked like that worked because the king's heart softened and he turned around and he was in the process of leaving. But while he was leaving, his 3 advisors approached him. They just kind of approached him while he was leaving in a kind of nuanced way, and they whispered to him and talked to him and whatever, and basically was imploring him that we have to do this, protecting Portugal. It's difficult, it's tough, yes, those are your grandchildren and it's her mother and whatever. But in order to ensure that the children not be legitimated, which would be that the Portugal monarchy line would have been blooded with Castilian blood, they're saying you have to get rid of their mother. Because if Pedro solidifies this thing, legitimizes this thing with her, the children automatically will become in line with the succession, right? And whatever they said to him, the king turned around and said, okay, go ahead with it. And they killed Ines de Castro right there. The understanding is that the sword was probably pulled out and thing, and they unalived her. Pedro, on royal business, learned of the murder, and he did not mourn quietly. Immediately, Pedro amassed an army and said he's going to war against his father. And war he did. Pedro attacked villages and interests that belonged to a Portuguese monarchy and thing. And there was a war going on between father and son in Portugal, which was a big deal, right? In medieval Europe, a crown prince making war against his reigning father violated the 5th commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, because these people consider themselves Christian. As we go ahead with this, I want you to keep in mind that these are the people that in present day we're often told that we should be thankful for the cruelty that they perpetrated on peoples all over the world in the name of colonialism and their agendas for conquest and so forth, because there was a trade-off. And the trade-off is that they brought civilization into the rest of the world. But very often people don't tell you about these things that they do, that they were just as human as anybody else, and that they had their problems too. And then in some instances, they were not exactly stable mentally. Crazy things, vile things to each other, themselves, in their space, that people could say, well, that's not exactly the epitome of civilization. But anyway, so Pedro violated the 5th commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, violated the divine right of kings. A king is anointed. You do not raise a sword against the anointed. That was the understanding in medieval Europe. And he violated the feudal contract. The son owed his father homage and obedience as a vassal of the realm, son subordinate to your father. Pedro never cared. Pedro was like, you killed the woman I love. You killed the mother of my 4 children. You killed the woman I love. And I'm going to war with you, even though you're my father. The war was not long, but it was very bloody. A lot of people died. And it split the Portuguese kingdom and thing because people were taking sides. Some people were on King Afonso's side, some people were on Pedro's side. It was Queen Beatrice of Castile, Pedro's mother, who personally negotiated the peace. Pedro and his father reconciled publicly. So father, son, they called up a little peace and everything was balanced up. But this May 28, in 1357, King Afonso IV died. Pedro's father died of natural causes after his 32-year reign. And Pedro became king. So he became king at age 37. The first thing Pedro do as king was him started to hunt down the three men them who killed the mother of his children, the three men who killed Ines. So again, this is generally considered an, do you know of the Ines de Castro mix-up? They don't say mix-up. I'm Jamaican. I say mix-up, and I'm the king of mix-up. Right? And this is an instance where there is so much to learn from mix-ups and things. Jamaicans would have you think that mix-ups are just like useless, salacious stories and so forth. But mix-ups or the window, the portal into enhanced understanding of that which we refer to as human nature. You learn a lot about people based on mix-ups, right? You learn so many truths about people based on mix-up. And this one here is no exception, right? So as soon as Pedro became king, he did not think about governance and legislature and collecting tax. Pedro's first thing was, we need to find the three men who killed Ines. And the quest was on. So about 4 years after taking the throne, so Pedro would have been around 41 years old at this time. No, before we get to that, the assassins, they had fled. Pedro Coelho, Alvaro Gonzalez, and Diogo Lopez Pacheco, they had fled. But listen to this. Remember the advisors who convinced the king to kill Ines? Their thing was, this was to protect Portugal from Castile. That's the main thing, that to protect the sovereignty of Portugal from Castile. But yet when Pedro became king, two of the three, they sought refuge in where? Castile. That's where they ran to. That's where they lived, in the same Castile. And Diogo Lopez, he went to France, or what was considered France at that time. All right. So at that time, Pedro wanted them though. And this is how things get interesting. So at that time, Castile was ruled by their king, who was also called Pedro, right? He was called Pedro the Cruel of Castile. Pedro the Cruel of Castile. And that king, he too had enemies that were hiding out in Portugal. So Pedro of Portugal, the king of Portugal, was hunting down the people who killed the mother of his children, and two of those people were in Castile. And the king of Castile, he was hunting down people too who were hiding in Portugal. And you know what happened? The two kings got together. Pedro of Portugal said, you give me those two, and I'll give you two from over here who's hiding over here. And that was the agreement. And the switch was made. And Pedro the Cruel of Castile sent out these emissaries to capture Pedro Coelho and Alvaro Gonzalez, captured them, and took them to Portugal. So they were brought to Portugal in chains. And then Pedro captured two people who Pedro the Cruel in Castile wanted, and they were sent there. So Pedro now has two of the men who killed his beloved Ines de Castro. Ines, who he loved so much, the love of his life. Ines, do the unthinkable, who made him exercise a breach of colossal proportion, which is to attack a king his father. It's virtually unheard of, right? Okay, so Pedro brought them, and the way that he ensured their demise was, there's a lot written about what was going on in his mind then and why he did it that way. But it is documented, like fully documented, that it was a grand scene set up where he was eating his dinner, and while feasting, they were killing the two men and killing them in a particular way. It was deliberate for them, for their hearts to be taken out, for their hearts to be ripped out. One of them heart was ripped out from the front, and another one's heart was ripped out from the back. So they had to desecrate the body, create entrances, cavities, and such and thing. And yes, you can reach the heart from the back, and as well you can reach it from the front. So this was, Pedro went through this thing to have this thing staged in that way. It was like dramatic, spectacular, and it was grotesque, of course. You're talking about you're eating your dinner and they're ripping out people's heart in front of you slowly and in a very organized way. But this was about revenge. He was avenging them, convincing his father to kill the woman he loved so dearly. Okay? So the heart removal as a punishment is a documented and medieval European jurisprudence, especially for traitors. Like, this wasn't unusual. Like, this was a thing back then when you are hated or you commit like the vilest crimes or whatever. Your heart was supposed to be ripped out of you in a dramatic fashion. All right. He had vengeance against those two. Diogo Lopez, who went to France, he wasn't caught, and he died of natural causes in France. So here's the part that actually happened, right? So Pedro called the Cortes, which is the assembly of Portuguese nobles, which is essentially the leadership of the country. To use some sort of modern equivalent, it would be like you say parliament, or you call Congress. And Pedro said that he had secretly married Ines de Castro before her death. He said that. It doesn't mean that he did it though, but it is understood that he said that. And having said that, he then declared her the lawful queen of Portugal posthumously, right, after her death. So Pedro is now saying that because I had Ines before her, she is the queen of Portugal. So Pedro's love for Ines is just remained strong after all these years. And one can only imagine that there might be something else going on there. And if you think like a man, respectfully, if one who want to disagree with this, I would think that he would have some sort of regret that he wasn't there to protect her. It sounds to me like Pedro feel really bad that he wasn't there to protect her. And then he's doing a lot now. After all these years she has passed, he's doing a lot now to basically remedy what he may have thought that he should have dealt with differently. So this is his way of remedying it, taking remedial actions to give to Ines what he thought that she deserved. And in so doing, Pedro is saying, Ines de Castro, the mother of my children, was my wife because I secretly married her. And therefore, she is the queen of Portugal. Love and power, man, I'm telling you. All right, so he declared her queen. Remember now, it's years now since she had died. And exhumed her body from her tomb after 6 years. And had her remains dressed in royal robes with a crown on her skull. Right? This is understood. Where she was buried, exhumed her body, put her in royal robes, and gave her a crown. And it is said he sat her on a throne next to him, next to his own, and that he ordered every noble in the hall to kneel and kiss her hand. That part is debated. There's some people said it happened. There's some people said it didn't happen. They've been debating it over years. And by the way, lots of plays, lots of operas and films and movies have been made of this. Like Ines de Castro, her name is big in Portugal history and heritage and so forth. Right? So, so the part that, so again, the part that is known, relatively generally known to be true, is that he publicly claimed that he had secretly married Ines, had her remains removed from where she was buried to what is called the monastery of Alcobaca, right? He had her remains moved in a ceremonial procession, had her remains moved, and he commissioned 2 tombs that still stand at Alcobaca to this day, like heavily visited. A lot of people go to Portugal who know this story. They just want to go there and see. And that the procession was a state event attended by nobility. The part that is the parts that are still debated was the whole idea that the exhumation was a coronation. Some people said nothing no go. Some people said that was just add on after, years after, centuries later. Also, the whole idea about the corpse on the throne, that is heavily debated also, that whether or not it's true. And the kissing of the hand by the nobles, that also is heavily debated. There is a consensus that those things did occur. But what did occur was that he claimed that he had secretly married her, and that he did indeed have her remains removed from where she was into the monastery of Alcobaca, and that he had commissioned 2 tombs, to be in Alcobaca, one for him and one for Ines, and they're still there, and that it was a state event, that whole process. So again, the monastery of Alcobaca is still there, and it's a Cistercian abbey founded in 1153. That's when it was founded, and it is still there, and it is one of the most important Gothic buildings in Europe, and love. The tombs are positioned facing each other, not side by side, facing each other. And the reasoning there, here we go with the love. Pedro arranged them that way because he's Christian. And he said, on the day of judgment, when the dead are raised, he wanted, when he was raised and when Ines was raised, that the first thing both of them saw was each other. Oh, you see why this mix up it has like a significant appeal, because the people who argue like, oh my God, it was so romantic. Yeah, but all this debauchery and this unaliving and people being killed and murdered and all this intrigue involving power and all this stuff and the history of the conflict between Portugal and Castile and all this stuff and these negotiations and these war of power and all of this. There's this love story, right? This is something that you call like, yeah, this is Hollywood, so that was supposedly his logic, and their carvings on the tombs, their carvings. Ines's tombs have scenes from the Bible, crucifixion, last judgment, and their own posthumous coronation, right? So you get it, crucifixion, and that she was unjustly crucified type of thing. This is echoing some of what was said about Jesus' crucifixion. And Pedro's tomb shows scenes of the Wheel of Fortune and the killing of the 2 assassins, including the removal of their hearts, right? That is on his tomb there too, right? So you have to put that there. So you see, for him to do that and then consciously require it to be placed on his tomb before his death and whatever, he's just making it clear that, in his word, he did the right thing. He took revenge for the woman he loved. He took revenge for the woman that he did, that in his mind he wasn't there to protect her and to save her, right? And that is just a scene. I had their hearts removed and thing, and that is a forever testament to my love for Ines. Both have life-sized effigies of the king and queen with lions and angels at the base. And the inscription on Pedro's tomb reads, this is Portuguese, Até ao fim do mundo, until the end of the world. Until the end of the world. So what Pedro was saying here, his love for Ines is eternal. And even in Ines's death, the love is strong. And when the day of judgment comes about, that love will still be strong. And as long as there is the existence of people and the world and whatever, that love will prevail. And if there is an end of the world, should that happen, that's the only time the love can be stopped. Pedro is in love, man. All right. So Pedro is remembered as the avenging lover king, and Ines is remembered as a queen of Portugal, and also remembered as a queen who was physically crowned years after she died. The state could not erase her. Her husband, if we believe Pedro that they were secretly married, her husband refused to let her be erased. And the monastery to this day preserves that refusal. And it is what Pedro did that has made this mix-up so enduring that it has survived over centuries. And still to this day, millions of people, when they go to Portugal, who know of this story and have their different emotional or intellectual attachments to it, and whatever other intrigue you could identify with it, it is still heavily visited. People go there and they check it out and they debate it and they discuss it. And some people say, well, if he did all of that, based on his love for her, then some people say, we believe it, that he really did exhumed her from the grave, put her in a throne, and have people show her respect because he was all about that. It's like, yo, Ines is going to get what she deserves, what she deserved, that he was trying to ensure that. So after Ines's death, for Pedro, it was just years and years and years of correcting what he would have considered to be a gross injustice. And we're still talking about it today, right? Still talking about it today. And again, in the context of all of this, I just want you to keep in mind that this whole thing, that because it was Portugal who started the Atlantic slave trade with the blessing of the then Pope, who was the voice that sanctioned and approved certain state level acts. And it was Portugal who started it. And this was an outgrowth of these things that were going on in Europe between themselves, and this thing for wealth and power. Their purpose in life is that that's what they should continually aspire for: increase wealth, increase power, increase control over everything and anything around them. They were doing this before amongst themselves. It's faulty. It's rife with problems and cruelty and pain and hurt. And just keep in mind that there's a great many people out there who keep telling us that these are people who brought civilization to the rest of the world. Nah, not true. They had their problems. They had serious problems, as is evidenced in this mix-up with the queen that was physically crowned years after she was buried. The mix-up surrounding Queen Ines de Castro. Make sure you're following me here. Make sure you're following me. Make sure you're following me. And click the bell for notifications. And I will be giving you more mix-ups from around the world and from history. There is a lot. I'll be back. Take care.